Now that we have an understanding of where the learning piece came from, the question that I always ask my students that I think is important is, where does it come from? Where does learning come from? Well, so where do you learn things? Well, the first is going to be from parents. And there was a study by Huseman, all right, et al., 1984. And here's what they did. They were looking at something called kind of the intergenerational effect that that aggression has. So what they did is they measured. So this is a massive longitudinal study. This is my favorite study of all time, and I think it's my favorite study. And I even have the results I'm going to show you in a second. I even have the state in my office hanging all the time. And basically, what they did is they assessed kids and parents' aggression. So I'm going to use my family's name for the ease of presentation, but I strongly urge you to kind of insert your own names here to make it relevant to your learning. So what they did is they had Chris, that's me, at age 8. And they measured my aggression at age 8. And then they also measured, let's say Paul, that's my dad, when he was 30. And they measured his aggression. All right. Now what they did is 22 years later, they measured Chris, my aggression again, at age 30. All right. Now, what's cool about this is I had my own kid at age 30. So my son, one of them is named Eric, and let's say we have him at about age 8. These are average ages, by the way. All right. And so what we have now is we have this what's called intergenerational stability and checking of aggression. So what they found is that on average, if my dad at age 30, if he was aggressive, that was correlated with my aggression at 0.55. Now remember, I'm not going to ask you numbers on this. I'm not going to ask you to know numbers, just know trends. So what this is suggesting is that as my dad's as his aggression goes up, so does mine. Now remember, what's important here is that this number 0.55, that suggests it's strong, but it's not 1. So what that suggests is we know that there are other factors besides who your parents are that predict your aggression. But parents are a strong predictor. And here's what's really cool, and this is what's blew my mind. This is why I love the study. My aggression is correlated with my son's aggression to the same degree. How cool is that? All right. Now, what's interesting here, so clearly your parent has an influence on your aggression. Okay, your parent has an influence on your aggression, just like your aggression will likely have an influence on your child. All right, and oh, by the way, aggression is stable over time. So if I'm an aggressive kid, I'm also an aggressive adult. I'm likely to be an aggressive adult. Now, here's what's cool. So parents matter, but check this out. Because of the way the study was set up, we can measure the grandparents' effect on the grandchild. And check this out. That correlation was still significant, but a lot less than the 0.55 we saw before. It's 0.26. All right, 0.26. And what this suggests is that the grandparents are still important, but not to the same degree as the parent. And let's think about why that is. Why is it that a grandparent would be influential, but not as strong as your parent would be? Well, number one is why it's not as strong is because most people don't live with their grandparents. All right. So take my grandparents as a great example. I only saw them once a year in the summertime. They lived in Ohio. I lived in Kansas. And so I'm not going to get that much exposure to them. So that's the first thing. But what's important here is that the grandparents still do matter. Your grandparents raised your parents. Your parents raised you. And so you got to expect there to be some sort of trickling down with how you're raised. Now, what's important to note is I'm not making a genetic argument. This isn't like genes. This is more like your grandparents taught your parents Your parents teach you. All right. Now, what's also important here is what we have to understand is that let's take Eric, for example, at age 8. He is being raised by me, Chris, at age 30. Well, I'm 35, but you get the point. But also another parent. There's another parent involved. Her name is Natalie. That's my wife. And so any aggression that I have may be subdued or changed because of how Natalie, my wife, and I raise my son together. All right. And so you would expect this to be less for those two reasons. So the first place we learn is from our parents. And the Huseman study is really cool at picking up that. So the second place we learn besides parents is our friends. All right, so friends are a good learning tool as well. So this was a study by Werner and Crick, 2004. And this was another longitudinal study, just like the Huseman study. Although the Huseman study, that spanned 22 years, which is probably one of the most impressive things ever. And what they did is a year, Werner and Crick. So what they had is they sampled elementary school kids, 2nd through 4th grade, at time 1, and then they measured them again a year later. So if they were in 2nd grade, now they're in 3rd. They're in 3rd grade, now they're in 4th, and you get the point. And what they did is they wanted to know how aggressive are their friends. So this is time 1. How aggressive are their friends, and how aggressive is the child themselves. And then they measured it again. They measured it again a year later. So this is time 2. And what they found, let's talk about the results for boys here. Just to make things easy, we're going to only talk about the boys. What they found is something that looks kind of like this. 0.15, and that is significant. And then this was 0.35, also significant. So what this tells us, and these are positive correlations here, what this tells us is that if you're an aggressive child at time 1, you're going to have aggressive friends at time 2. And if you have aggressive friends at time 1, you are also going to be an aggressive child at time 2. And so what this suggests is a kind of a mutually beneficial, if you think of it like that, relationship, a symbiotic relationship, such that as your friend, if you pick your friends at time 1, they're aggressive, you're also going to be aggressive. Just like if you're aggressive, you're going to seek out aggressive friends. You create your own hostile environment. All right. And that's, and what this suggests, once again, longitudinally, is that where we learn from our friends, especially when you're in the age group of elementary school. Our friendships are important to us. And so if our friends are aggressive, we're going to act like them. And if we are aggressive, we're going to find similar others that are also aggressive to hang out with. And remember, and so that's one thing that longitudinal studies afford us the ability to do, is check out these things over time for the same kids. And even though this isn't 22 years like the Huseman study, it's still impressive nonetheless to show that you have this effect here with the friends. And the final piece of where we learn has got to be from the media. So there was another longitudinal study done by Aron et al. 1972. There's been other updated ones since then, but this is the easiest one to talk about. And what he did is he did a 2-wave study. He had kids in 3rd grade, so that would make them, how old are you in 3rd grade? 8. So at time 1, he measured media violence exposure and your aggression at age 8, right? And then time 2 was when they were in 13th grade. So 13th grade is in college. So that you're about 18. So this is a 10-year difference. And he also measured your preference for media violence, specific, and your aggression. Now, media violence here, I want you to note that this was done in the 70s. So it was only TV, but that's still fine. And here's what they found. They found that media violence at age 8 predicts your aggression 10 years later. That's the correlation coefficient. But this link here is actually not significant. So it's not that the violent kids are seeking out aggressive media later. It's more like the media violence that they're exposed to is predicting their aggression 10 years later. And once again, the longitudinal study shows that. So once again, I'm not going to ever test you on numbers. All right. I'm not going to test you on numbers, but what I will reserve the right to test you on is these general trends. And you have to keep straight what study did what. So the Aaron study from 1972, that dealt with media violence. And what they found is that media violence at time 1, when the people are kids at age 8, predicts aggression at age 18 and not the other way around. Warner and Crick found this reciprocal relationship with kids, such that what they found is that aggressive kids have aggressive friends and vice versa. And then finally, the Huseman longitudinal study showed that parents matter and grandparents also matter, but to a lesser degree. All right. So you just need to keep kind of all that straight. What's cool about the Huseman study, the long one, is that the effect of the grandparent is called indirect. So it's not a direct relationship to the kid. It's mostly indirect through the parents themselves. And needless to say, this is where we learn. We learn from our environment. And what's our environment? Friends, family, media. All right. And that's going to end it for the aggression lecture. So Unit 9 is done. And we have one more left, which is pro-social behavior.